Welcome to the webinar on keeping the database healthy with MMS generations. I'm Beth Elliott, your trainer today, and we'll be going over how to keep the database running smoothly, running quickly, and how to keep things cleaned up for what you need to work with. So what we're going to start with is sort of a difference between if you needed to duplicate a database, or the difference between a new or duplicated database, because sometimes you might want to make a copy of your database to give people an area where they can go work with it and try things out. And you would do that by going under File, New Database, and it will always close the database you have open. And you have create a new or duplicate a database. When you create a new database, you're just starting it from scratch. There's nothing in it. It just has the default fields and so on. But you can also duplicate an existing database, in which case it will let you select what database you want to copy and then give it a new name. This can be handy if you are potentially restoring a database and you want to restore it into a different name. Say you have to try and get some data back, you'd like to see what's going on, so I can do a district and then give it a new name, call it backup, call it audit, whatever you want for prior year. Can be this is your alumni database, something like that. And then you just process. And so what that does is it takes an exact copy of your database from where you are now and put it into the new name. The nice thing with that is it gives you areas where all your setup is already done. When you create a new database, you're going to select what school years you want to work with, and what schools rather, and what school year. So I might want to add a new database, and I've added my 13-14 school year maybe, and call it staff, in which case I can keep my information that I'm tracking as far as I can do attendance on my staff, and I can add in my substitutes. So I'm using the calendars and the days and all of that like I do with my students, but I can also do it with my staff. So that's an area where I might want to create a new database. So it just gives you those two options. If you were running Visual Foxpro, then there is a database number that you would need to coordinate, and that number needs to be unique across your district. So if you have some local installs, you need to make sure your database number is unique for all your schools. If you are in Visual Foxpro, when you go into File, there will be a backup database that you need to do on a periodic basis. And when you do that, it will let you select your database and a location for you to back it up into. In SQL, what you would do instead is you go into your SQL Management Studio. And in here you can click the plus sign in front of your databases. You can right-click on one of your databases. And under Tasks is going to be Backup. And with the backup, you can specify where you want to back it up. There is, within the SQL area, there is the backup folder. Now, a lot of times you can have district and have your database name as district. If I wanted to start a new one, I would remove that and add a new line. Now, it defaults into the backup folder that comes with SQL when it gets created. You can click on the three dots, the ellipsis button, and change your backup location. You might not want it on the server where you have your backup programs, or you might want to be able to put it in its own folder. Now that folder does need to be exist. It won't let you add a folder right here, but you can go to another area and put a backup in there. So if I wanted to come down into my MMSGE folder, I could go to an area where I had a backup folder itself. Actually, mine is under MMS Generations. So if I come in here, I don't have anything really in my data folder, so I could back up right into my data folder. And then you would give it a name. I usually use the same name as the file, and I do include the .bak because that makes it easier for the system to find it when I want to restore the database. And whether that BAK is capital or lowercase, it really doesn't matter as long as I've added it in there. So I click OK, and then I tell it OK, and it will add that to a line here for where I want to back it up, and I would click OK. It's going to go through and back up my database so I have a copy that I can work with. You can also set up a maintenance plan within SQL that will allow the system to automatically back up for you, which is a much better way than you having to go in and do it individually. Now, you might have a backup like this so that you can, you're about to go to a new version of the software, so you want a backup of the system. And, we recommend that you do that before you go to a new version of our software. And that makes sense for anything that you're doing. You always want to be able to go back to where it was, just in case. I'd rather have a backup I don't need than not have a backup. So it would give me that capability. And it'll show you the percentage as it runs through. And if I go into my Explorer, into my MMS Generations data folder, I'd be able to see where it's working on that backup. So as I come in here, here's the backup file that it's working with. So it just lets me see. And when it gets done, it will give me a line across the top that says it's done, and then I'm at 100%. So that makes it easy for me to work with. What a maintenance plan will do, and we'll do that next, is it sets it up so I can set a time frame for it to back up and have it automatically do it. And I can keep my databases separate because I'm backing up the district database. But I also want to make sure, and the district is whatever name your database is. And if I come in here, I can see how big the file is. Now, if I'm running out of space, I can right-click on my backup, and I can use 7-zip, which is a compression like WinZip is. And there's some of the files that it gets too big in the regular system where I could do a send to compressed. It's a matter of how big the file is. There's some of the files WinZip, when you get real big, it can't handle. But I can go into WinZip and say, okay, I want to add it to a zip backup. I usually do that rather than a 7-zip. And when I do that, it's going to go in and compress what I have. And the nice thing there is the backup will be even smaller. So I'm looking at a 280 some odd meg file. When I get through with compressing it, it's going to be 20-something meg, or maybe 30 meg. So it's a much smaller file. It goes down to about 10% of the size. And that just means that depending on how many I want to keep a hold of, I can have those. And you might want to, if even with an automated backup, come in and say, okay, once a week I want to take one of my Friday backups and put it off in another location, or compress it. So if I'm clearing out the regular BAKs, depending on how many days out there I want, that gives me the option. And you might want to keep a month worth at a time, or keep one a month, one a week, that sort of thing, so you have a way to go back, and in case something happens, a teacher's lost their grades or something has happened, then you need to be able to go back and see what happened at that point. So it does give you that capability to work with it. The maintenance plan allows you to not just back up the database, but it will also allow you to rebuild the indexes and or to shrink the database. Now, when you work with the system, it will put out transactions in the LDF file rather. These are different log files or transaction files than the ones in the MMS edit logging. That's an area that we need to also look at to see how many records we have. But in here you can set it up that, say, where you want to put it. You can have a separate folder for each database, and you can have it automatically date and timestamp it. So you can set it up to run at, say, 2 in the morning when most people are not on the system anymore. And it very nicely works that way, that it says, yep, I want to go in and do that, and it'll do it for me on a periodic basis. And some schools will do it every day, even on weekends. Some will opt to only do it weekdays. And that's entirely up to you which way you want to work with that. This is almost done. Doing the compression. So it looks at my total size of 280 meg, and you notice the compressed size is, at this point, 23. It might go up to 24 meg. So that's a big difference in how much space I need on my hard drive, just by doing that. And a lot of times, if I'm doing the backup, I might change the name once I've saved it and put in the date, the version, something like that, depending on why I was doing the backup. If I'm back here in the server, I can go down to Management. I'm going to actually come here and hit the plus sign. And I can look at Maintenance Plans. Now you might already have some maintenance plans, or you might choose to right-click and do a new plan wizard and let the system walk you through. And that's what I'll do. I'm going to let it walk through a plan for me. So it's going to let me check integrity, tells me some of the things that it can do. And I'm going to go next. And I need to give it a name. So instead of maintenance plan, it's my my district and user backups. And I can put in a description where I'm going to, back up the system, reindex, and that sort of thing. And I can do a separate single schedule for the entire plan, or I can do separate schedules for each task, which means I have one schedule for the backup and one schedule for the reindex. Right now there is no schedule set up, so I'm going to change that. And it says this is the name of my maintenance plan. It's a recurring. I want to do it on a weekly basis, and I can check which days, or I can just say just do it on a daily basis and do it every day. Now some might do it more than once. I'm going to do here, it's set up for midnight. I might decide I'd rather do it at 1 in the morning. I can have starting and ending times. You can give it a start date, and it occurs every day at 1 in the morning. And I can click OK. And I could, if this was actually when I was starting it, I would start it tomorrow, because this morning's 1 a.m. has already gone by. But it wouldn't matter, because it still knows that's when it needs to run. So that's the schedule of when it's going to run. When I go next, I can choose what I want it to do. So I want it to rebuild the indexes, and I want to do a full backup. The advantage of a full backup over a differential is that it allows me, when I do a differential backup, you start with a full backup, and then a differential is the changes from there forward. But if I have to restore a differential backup, I have to go back to the last full backup and then do each differential in between. Where if I do a full backup, it just takes everything and I don't have to worry about that. So I'm going to go ahead and go next. And it gives you a little description back here as to what each of these items are. The rebuild index here is sort of the same as the rebuild index in Generations, it's automated. So I know that once a night it's going to rebuild my indexes. I can also maybe set up a different backup or maintenance plan to do a shrink. And what the shrink does is when you shrink the database, it removes the free space or freeze it, which can really reduce the size of your database. So we're going to go next. Wants to know the order we want to do these, so I might want to back it up first and then reindex. Going to go next, and all I did is I hit the move, the one that's highlighted, it moved up or down. And if I had more than two things here, I would be able to move it up and down further. Now when I go next, it wants to know what I want to do. So it knows I'm doing the backup, and I can select which databases I want to back up. I want to back up my district database, and I want to back up my user database. If you have a side database, such as a SIF database that you use for the school's interoperability framework, if you have a staff database, then you might want to back up those also. So it now knows which databases I want to back up. I'm going to back it up to disk. You can set it to go to tape. If I'm going to tape, I have the option to go across one or more files. I don't need to do that. I can create a data backup file for every database, so my user database is separate from my school database, my data in effect, so it makes that easier. I can opt to create a subfolder, so each database has its own folder that I can go in and look at. I want to leave the BAK file extension. I can pick the location of where I want to back up. If I have more than one drive that I have access to, then I can select that also. So I'm going to go back into my MMS generations folder to the data and say that's where I want to back up. And I do want to verify the backup integrity. It takes a little longer, but it makes sure it knows it has a good backup. Last thing you want to do is need to go back to a backup and find out it's a bad backup. And I leave it with the default settings for the compression. And I go next. And now it wants to know about the rebuild index. And again, we select the databases we want to rebuild. The index is on. We're just going to let it to the default amount of free space. And we go next. It will write out a text file for you for how it did. You can change that. The default is it's going to go into wherever you'd like it. So I'm going to go put it in the same folder. And what's nice is it'll go right in the data folder where the other backups are going to go into their own subfolders. Now, instead of writing a report, you can opt to have it email it to you. So you get a reminder, in the morning of how it did. And that's entirely your choice. So it lets me re-see what it's going to do. I'm finished. So it will go in and create those items. It won't actually do the backup right now. It's just setting up the task. Ready to go. And what I'll see is I'll see a new plan being added here. So it set up the task for me. I can look at the report. I can view it, save it, whatever I need to do, and this just says, yep, it created everything. I'm going to close. So that plan will actually have been added to here. And I can refresh, and the new plan is there. If I double-click on it, I can actually see what that plan looks like. And it gives me the option to be able to modify anything I want. You can also right-click on it and tell it you'd like to run it now. And that's always, something that is an option. So it's letting me see what sort of planned tasks I can work with. It's showing me here the items that I put in, and if I click on this, I can stretch it out. If I click it right, that's better. So I can actually see what it is that I opted to work with. So I can see which databases I want to do. This is the backup. It's a full backup going to disk. Here's the rebuild. So it lets me see what I want to do. And if I want to, I could add more to it. I can come in here, see when it occurs. I can even change the time and location of the time that I want to work with it. I would have to go in here in order to change the location. But it does give me that option. I didn't really change anything there, so I can say no. You can right-click and tell it to execute, which means it would do it right now without a problem. I talked about shrinking. I can right-click on a particular table or database, go to the tasks, and tell it to shrink. And there's two versions of the shrink. One is the overall database, and one is where I can pick the database files in the sense of whether it is the log or the data, the MDF or the LDF. If I look at the database, even for my users, I can see how much space is currently allocated and how much is available. So I could get 15 or 17% of my file back if I shrink the database, which is to release the unused space. And you can also give a maximum free space when you're after that. If I do the same for my full database, I can come in and see how much overall space. So it looks like right now I have 26% of my file, which is currently free space. Now if I close this and go back and look at the individual files, I can see where that space is in the sense of whether it is in the data or in the log. As I said, the log is the LDF, so I've got 90% of my log file, which is free space. Sometimes I don't want to necessarily go all the way down because anytime it needs to add more space, it takes that time to take so much space at a time. Now it'll put out an area so it can bog it down a little bit if I get my file too small. Now the log isn't too bad because it's not that big, but if I look at my data, I can see that a third of my data, or almost a little over a quarter of my database, is free. At a not quite 400 meg file, that's not too bad. But if I was looking at a 4 gig file, that's something else. So it's something that I might want to do periodically. Now that the school year is ended, I might want to go in and go ahead and shrink the database. So it lets me work with that. Now when you run that shrink, it's not going to show you a percentage like the backup or restore will. You can also right-click here and go down into your properties. And that'll let you see the different areas of what you have to work with. And if I go into my options, the options let me see whether my backup or recovery model is simple or full. Now we usually do simple, which helps reduce the size of that log file. You can also go to your files. And in the files you get to see what is your initial size. So basically how big is that file and how much are you growing by. Now with a even 200 meg file growing at 1 meg at a time, that might not be what I need to do. So I might want to double click on that and change it and increase the size of how much I want to open it up for. So it does give me options that I can come in and say, oh, how much do I want to grow by? So just things to be aware of. Any questions on setting up your automated maintenance plan? Now when it creates those files, it'll date and time stamp it, so you could set up more than one at a time. Craig's question was, are these options available in generations as well? I can rebuild the indexes in generations. I cannot automatically set up a backup in generations, nor can I shrink it in generations because those are SQL functions. So, I do have a couple of limitations there. In generations, if I want to rebuild the indexes, I can just go to Admin, and there is a Rebuild Indexes item. Within here, it wants to know what database, and it will run through and re-index for you. When you go to a new version of the web portal at this point, there is a update database structure within generations, and there is also now an update database structure and re-index within the portal itself. And it's the one in generations will do all the generation tables, and it will re-index everything. The one in the portals will make sure that your portal tables are up to date. So it does give you some options there. So this just will take a little bit for it to work with. Now, Chris had a question earlier about checkpoint files. If I go ahead and log into the staff portal, the staff portal has an area under the automated schedule builder where you can maintain your checkpoint files. And what's nice there is you can delete them, not just create them. So it'll bring up my different portals. I have a different tab for each one. So I can go over to the portal once it comes up. To do a database restore, you would right-click on the database that you want to restore, go to your tasks, and this time tell it to restore the database. In here you would go from device, hit the three dots, the ellipsis, and go add the file. Now this will always go to your SQL backup first. And you can pick one of the ones that's here, or you can go to where you have your backups. And this is where it's going to show you the .bak. So you can select the backup you want to restore from. You click OK. You would say you do want to restore from that one, and it will show you the database name that you backed up, which server you're on. If you scroll right, you'll be able to see times and so on of when the backup was made. Now you can restore to the same database name, or you can actually opt to restore to a different name. So if I was doing this, say I was doing this tomorrow, I might want to call the database July 29 because that's the database, that's where it was when I did the backup. If I change the name here, when I go into my options, it will automatically show you the original name and show me the new name that it went into. So the original file will still be there. This will just give me another one with a different name. If I'm trying to go back to a specific location, this is better. This I can do rather than doing a duplicate, because the duplicate is where I am now, where this one is where I was. If I hadn't changed the name, and I can still come in here, hit the three dots and say, oh, I want to put it in the same place, but I can change the name of what I'm working with. It's going to go in my data folder, and so I can give it a name. So if I wanted to put it back to district, I could. And I would need to do that for both files. And my data does not have to be stored in the drive where I have put in the program. And what this will do is it'll automatically add, actually that should not have been BAK, but I can come in and specify what I want to work with. So it will give me the option. I can also drop the list, tell it the file name. Oops, I really didn't mean to restore that. Now when you do the option, you also want to make sure you overwrite your existing database with a replace, and that'll make sure that you have the item still there. Now on these, it'll give me the MDF for the main data and the LDF for the log. This is your transaction log. Say if you were in as a teacher and you were putting in scores and so on, or starting to add in a new assignment, that's the kind of transaction that's in there until it's complete, and then it will finish it out and work from there. So it makes it easy for you to be able to work with and say, yeah, that's where I want to go. If you click the OK, it's going to start the backup. But I always want to make sure that I'm overwriting my existing database. If I'm doing a new one, then it's not a problem. But if I'm overwriting my regular one, it gives me an option where I can come in. So just a different way for me to restore my database. So my regular software finished the backup with the reindex within generations. If I bring back up my web portal, I want to go to the staff, I can come in, log in as a user. Okay. Somebody asked me to do a quick walkthrough through creating a backup to a different locations and generations. When you do your backup here I can't do it within generations. If I'm going to do a backup, I need to do it within SQL. And within SQL, if I had a different location, if I had another drive that I could go to that it recognized. The machine I'm on right now has a shared folder, but it's not, SQL is not seeing that. But I could say, come in here and say, go to my C drive, if I can get it to cooperate. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it my SQL Backups. When I'm in here, I can right-click, go to the task, tell it I want to backup. I can remove where I currently have it and add a new location and click the 3 dots. Now whether you don't have SQL, I'll come back to that in just a moment. In here, what you would do is instead of going to the standard location, you would be able to go to a different location. Go back down here and say I want to go to SQL Backups and then give it the backup name that I want. In Visual Fox Pro, so that's where I would just tell it where I want to go. If I am in Visual Fox Pro, let me minimize all of these. You bring up the software. You would still have your username and password. And you're going to go under File and do a backup database. In here, you would select which database you want to back up. You can opt to back up your users. You can opt to back up the user-defined reports and labels, which is any of your saved settings, your filters, because it'll do the OBJ file and it'll do your user copies of files. And to change the path, you just come over here, click the 3 dots, and tell it where you want to back up. And in here, I'm in my Visual Fox Pro. I can come in, actually use the same folder I had just created, even though it says SQL Backups. I could go to another drive, and as long as it is in your drive list, you would just select it and tell it that's where you want to go. It can take longer if you're going across drives. You know, if it's just a regular another network drive, not a problem. And I'm going to tell it where I want to put the backup. I can, in here, make a new folder. So if I wanted to, I could come back up here to my C drive or any other drive, make a new folder. Call it MMS Backups. Click OK. It'll give me that location, and that can be an external drive. You know, if my data's on the D drive, I want to back up to the E drive, that's perfectly okay. And you process, it will take, because I left all 3 checked, it will back up everything in there. And if you have different databases, when I had selected it, then it would give me the option to actually back them all up into the same location. That's not a problem at all. Now it will back up all of the files of the database I specified, both the DBF, which is your data, the CDX, which is the indexes, and the FPT, which is your notes. Now there might also be some BAKs, which is the internal backups to the DBF, and TBKs, which are the backups of the FPTs. Now we don't use those backups. The system generates the BAKs and the TBKs when you update the database structure. Usually that's when those occur. And we don't really use those, so you can, to help cut down the file sizes, you can throw those away. And that's just a matter of you go into your data folder and remove them. So it'll just run through. And while this is processing, this is showing the different tables as it backs up. The 3 letters indicate the table. So SEL was my valid data selection. STF is other areas. The TCH was the staff table. So it's letting me see what it does when it does the backup. Now when it's done, it'll tell me how many files it backed up. If I need to restore that Visual FoxPro table, then I would exit out of here, and I could back up another database. If I had another one, I could go select it, and it would allow me to restore or back up that one also. The users and the user-defined area, if you back it up once, even if you're backing up another database, you don't need to do those again. If you go to back up and to the same location you did before, it will tell you there's already files there and warn you that it's going to override them. If I need to do a restore, I come down to Restore Database, tell it where it is, lets me pick which database. I can opt to restore my users instead of my main database if that's what I wanted to do. And then I would tell it where I want to restore it to. So I would come down and indicate in my case, the Visual FoxPro data folder, and say that's where I want to put it. So very straightforward as far as how to back up and restore that. The rebuild index is under admin. It's the same as you did before, as I showed under SQL. Now if I go into the user table, into the data folder rather, I can see where I have some pictures. You can order this by the file type. So if I see BAKs, I can opt to get rid of those. If I go the other direction, I get rid of that. I might also see my TBKs, which is another file that I can get rid of. The TBK, as I said, was a backup of the FPT, and the BAK is a backup of the DBF. And when you rebuild your indexes, those files are going to be created. When you update the database structures, those files will be created. In either case, you have the option to go in and get rid of them, because some of those can get pretty large. These aren't bad. But when you think of some of your other files, if I look at this by size, if I'm backing up, here's my grade table. My grade table is 24 meg, in my database, but that could be much larger depending on what you're working with. So it takes up more space when you do the backup. So it does give you that option. Okay? Either one of those will work. If I am in Visual FoxPro and I want to clear up my checkpoints, I would go to the data folder, into the area, and I would into my work folder, and I would have the work folders there for where my backups are for information. And they might be CPT rather for checkpoint, and they might also have an FPT that goes with it that I would want to get rid of. And I would just find them in here, highlight these are work tables from my automated schedule builder if I'm not done with the automated for the year, I can come in, highlight them, and right-click and delete them. In SQL, I would go into my staff portal. I can log in as any user with access to the staff portal who also has access to the scheduling items. And then I would go in under the different areas. Now it's going to be under my scheduling. Now this particular user does not have access to the main schedulers because they're in just as counselor. So I want to be logged in, and with admin portal, you can limit what areas that you can have your user in. So a regular guidance counselor, I've opted not to give access to be able to change checkpoints and so on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log out and come in as scheduler or in as the administrator, or anyone with administrator privileges that you probably haven't taken the menu items away from. So again, I go under scheduling, I go to automated schedule builder, and at the bottom is manage checkpoints. In here, it's going to list all of the checkpoints that are out there. So it's going to bring up a list and let me modify. A checkpoint is a mini backup for scheduling purposes. What's nice in the portals is it shows you the menu cascade that you go down. Now if I want to get rid of this checkpoint from 2011, because the checkpoint names are month, day, year, and then the letter is which one on that day. And you have the ability to have 26 checkpoints on the same day. And if you find you have some old ones out there, all you need to do is come in, right-click or go over and hit the delete this checkpoint, and it will allow you to delete the checkpoint. And that does all of the files. There are 9 different tables that are set up when you do a checkpoint, and it lists them up here. And what this does is it gets rid of all 9 checkpoint tables. You get to verify that you want to do that, and you say yes, and it will remove it from the file. And you can do the same thing for the next one. So if you are done doing all of the ones you need, go ahead and clear them all out, and you can create a new one. In Visual Foxborough, you go to your work folder and you delete them from there. And the checkpoints are specific to the user, where in SQL they are specific to the database. So just a difference in where the location is. As easy as that to get rid of them. Now there's other maintenance that you want to do on a periodic basis. If I go back into Generations and or into Visual Foxborough. And in here is you have your data integrity. What the data integrity does is it gives you a way to be able to double check that what you have in there is valid. So it wants me to open a database first, and then it will bring up my data integrity. In here I can pick the school I want to work with. It'll always default to the school you have open and the school year that you're in. The items that are in here for the contact table, it wants to add missing contacts and report invalid records. So if I had merged data from an elementary to a middle school or a middle to a high school, and the lower school had more contacts than the upper school. Say I had 4 contacts in the elementary but only 3 in the high school or the middle school that I was bringing it into. The report invalid would be is I now have a 4th contact that the high school doesn't know about. It'll still leave it, it'll just tell me I have a 4th one out there. If I was going the other way, I would have 3 at the elementary, say, and 4 at the middle school. Then it would add that 4th missing contact for me. If I have a multi-school district, the premise is that I would really rather have every year have the same number and every school have the same number of contacts. So the first item reports the invalid, where the second item actually removes the invalid record. So if I had 4 contacts, but my database configuration only said I needed 3, this item would actually remove that 4th contact. For all tables, I'm going to delete orphan records. The orphan records are records that you have not in the student master table, but in my other tables that I don't have a student master table for anymore. That might happen if I'm rolling, say, health records from an elementary to a middle school. And I'm pulling all of my students from the elementary that are rolling to the middle school. And I want to say, yep, bring them all over. But the middle school already knows that one of the students is leaving, so they've deleted the student master table records. That's where I could get an orphan. So it gives me the option to get rid of those. I want to list invalid courses and sections. What this does is it checks between the catalog, the section table, and the student schedule table. It's going to look in the section and say, does this catalog, or does the course exist in the course table? If it doesn't, it's going to report it. It will look at the student record and say, does the course exist in the catalog? Does the course section exist in the section table? And if they don't, it's going to report it for me. The invalid days or periods is in your database config, you have specified how many days and how many periods. So this is going to check the sections and make sure that the periods and the days are not more than what you have in your database config. So if I had for some reason, say I had a 6-day schedule last year and I have a 5-day schedule this year, and I have rolled my sections from last year to this year, it's going to say, wait a minute, you have a 6th day that's not in your database config. And the same with the periods. If I had 10 periods last year and 9 periods this year, it's going to tell me I have an invalid period. And if I'm in the section editor, that invalid period would show as an asterisk, saying, wait a minute, I don't know what this is supposed to be. The validate, grade, and withdrawal flags, what that does is it goes through the student's schedule record, looks at the grade records and say, oh, do you have grades associated with this course and section that the student has? If so, I want to make sure has grades as a flag is set to true. If one of those grades is a withdrawal grade, I want to make sure I have set the withdrawal flag to be true. In SQL, there is also an entry and exit date for the section. And if the student has an exit date, then it will also set the withdrawal flag, provided that it knows I'm withdrawing, so I can work with that. I don't have the entry-exit dates available if I am in Visual FoxPro. So it's just strictly, is one of my grades flagged as withdrawal? And it looks at the valid grade list to find that out. Our default grade list will show a M grade of a medical grade as a withdrawal grade. You might choose that, oh, that's not a withdrawal. I didn't mean that to be a withdrawal grade, so you go and change the valid grade list to make the M grade medical as not being withdrawn. You come in here, you update your grade and withdrawal flags, and where that grade had been assigned and said, oh, they withdrew from the class, this will put them back into the class. And the students with the grade flag is the student has to have, the section has to be identified for the student that they have grades in order for it to show on report cards and transcripts. So that doesn't hurt you any to just let it go through and run it. The synchronized student grade records, what this does is it's going to look at the grade plan. It's going to check the student grade records for the course that they have and say, oh, do I have all the grades I'm supposed to have? When Automated Schedule Builder builds sections, it doesn't add the grade plan to it. You add that later. So just before school starts and on a periodic basis throughout the year, you want to come in and synchronize the student grade records. So the teachers would have the appropriate grade bins to store their grades in. the synchronized grade reporting grade point value groups is there are 5 grade point value groups. What this does is it says, well, if I've added a grade to one of my groups, I want to make sure I've added it to the other groups. If I delete a grade from one of my groups, I want to delete it from the others. And it uses grade point value group 1, or A, as where it's checking. So if it's in grade point value group A, I want to make sure that it's in the other ones, or not in the other ones, depending if I deleted it. The all schools and all years says I'm going to ignore my current school and I'm going to do it for all of them. And I'm going to look at all years, and it wants to synchronize the course catalog and the course sequence table. When you add transfer courses, it doesn't add them into the course sequence table. And that's why you want to let it get updated. The synchronize the sort order in my student health immunization table. What that does is if I have changed the sort order, so I want to put all my polios together, all my DPTs, I've changed what the sort order is of how I want to group them. What this does is it goes back through and says, looks at the health condition table for the immunization sort order, goes to the student record, and puts them in the same order. For appointments, it's going to delete users not found in the user table, figuring that the user's not here anymore, I don't have to keep the appointments. The section table, it'll update sections with the period set to 0. With the 94.3 version of Generations of MMS, you could have a blank or 0 period. In Generations, it doesn't allow that. It has to have at least a number 1. So what this does is it changes the period from 0 to 1, and it clears out the days so that you're saying it doesn't really beat. For all schools and years, it will list duplicate records in the ATM, which is the Student Attendance Entry Withdrawal Table. ATN as in Nancy is the Student Attendance Detail. That's your daily attendance. CON is your contacts. GRD is the student grade records, and PAT is the class attendance or period attendance tables. The system doesn't like it when you have duplicates in there. So this will give you the ability where it can go through and clear them out. Or it won't clear it out, it'll at least report them to you. And it will look at all years and all tables. For the health screening, it will compute and store the student's BMI and BMI percentile based on their height and weight. For all schools and years, it'll remove corrupted records from all tables. So if it has a school year that it doesn't understand, things like that, it'll get rid of the records for you. For all schools and years, it will delete orphan student discipline action records. And what this is it has an action record that no longer has the infraction that it was associated with. So it just gives you a way. It's not a normal orphan that I would see at the beginning where I said remove all orphan records, because the student exists. The problem is that the infraction that the action was associated with no longer does. For my student assessment records, it's going to report versus repair records not found in the definition table and or remove them. So if I've changed something in my definition, it will try and repair them versus removing them completely. And I can also add any missing definitions. So if I had changed a definition for an assessment, say I added another level, then it will add that record in for me. For class attendance, it's going to remove records for a time period when the class doesn't meet. So if I changed when a section met, this gives me a way to be able to go in and get rid of those sort of extraneous records. For the skills table, I can report or remove invalid grade records. So if I have changed what skills I'm associating with a particular group, this will come in and say, if I had 5 skills before, it's now 4. This will come in and remove that 5th skill that doesn't exist anymore, or at least report it. For my catalog table, it's going to report invalid student skill group records. So if I have associated a skill group with a course and that skill group no longer exists, it's going to come up and say, yoo-hoo, I either want to report it or remove it. For the student skill grade table, it's going to synchronize the student's scheduling table. So it's going to look at what courses the student has. From the course, it's going to look at the catalog to know what skill group is associated with that course, and it's going to make sure the student has the skill records. It's like the grade reporting synchronized student grade records. And for all schools and years, it's going to remove Orphan gradebook assignment and assignment grade records. So basically, if I have an assignment that doesn't exist, that for a course that doesn't exist anymore, it's going to get rid of those for me. Now I can start at the top, select the first record, scroll to the bottom, hold my Shift key down, and select everything in between. And you'll see that it might not do all of them, because it's going to opt that I would rather report my invalids rather than remove them. If I know they're out there, I can hold my Control key down and say I want to remove. I want to uncheck the report and I want to add the remove instead. So it gives me options to be able to come in and specify how I want to work with that. There is no problem with running data integrity prior to scheduling being complete, and some of it we actually recommend that you do. It just helps keep things in order, because it might have been in scheduling that you had a student with a course request that came in through the web portal course registration for a course that no longer exists. So there are things like that that it would come up and show you. So it just gives you the option to be able to select all of those. You can process for one school. When it's done, the print log file goes green, and you can actually look at it and print it. You can also then change to another school and run it again. Now some of them that are the all schools, all tables, you can opt on the second run to say, oh, I don't need that one anymore. I've already run that once. I don't need to run it again. Doesn't hurt you, just takes more time. It will create a log file, a TXT file that's out there. The DB is because we're doing data integrity for database, and then it's a random 6-digit number. These are in your work folder, and you can periodically go in and get rid of them. So if you see a whole bunch of those, just go in and wipe them out. So it does give you that option. In Visual Studio, the other version, you also have a data integrity. The difference here is the information for the assessments. Some of the records that I saw when I was in SQL are not going to be available in Visual Studio. But other than that, it's the same thing, that you can come in and say, here's my same on the catalog and so on. So you can highlight the first one, scroll to the bottom, go to that, and get rid of the ones you don't want. So it makes it real handy to be able to come in and do that. Now, this is something that we're manually running in MMS. You can go into your MMS generations folder, and there are a pair of files at the top, and one is the Adm Set Up and the other is the Adm Utility. The Adm Set Up, what it does is it allows you to create parameters for running the data integrity when you're not there. So it's saying, oh, I don't have this setup file. Do I want to create it? Yes. What this does is I can come in for any and all of my schools and say which items do I want to run, and then run it at 3 o'clock in the morning. I might want to run it after I do my backup. And I can label the groups any way I want. I can select which group to be executed. I can select which group to be modified. And I can have 100 different groups. So I could actually come in here and say I want to change the name. I want to do a full data integrity. I can set up the username when I run this, and I can have a different username. So I can do it as administrator, or I can actually create a user that's going to do it for me, because it's going to use that username and password when it comes in. I can add which database I want to work with, and it might also be the path if I was in the other. And then I can select my school year. Or coming up, I want to do it for next year. I want to update the structure, rebuild the indexes, or run data integrity. So I can pick all three if I want, or I can say I only want to do a couple of them. If I'm going to come in here, I can modify my group descriptions. So I can change which ones I want to work with. And what that means, when I come over here, it'll have the new name that I specify. And I go over to my data integrity, and I can say which of the items do I want to run. So I can opt that I want to run them all. And I can save that setting and exit saying I'm done. Or I can, so it's saying, yep, those are the items I want to do. I just keep adding in. And that's because I changed the name. And I can save this. And I can, of course, add in different school years. Now that's all set to run. It knows what group I'm working with. And what I do is, for the executable, the ADM utility, is I set up a scheduled task for it. Okay? So I can come in and do my scheduled task and say when I want to run it. So I go into the task scheduler. Especially things like the synchronize the grade records, rebuild the indexes, having that done on a periodic basis is really going to help the speed of my system. Now in Visual Foxborough, we had talked earlier. Let's finish this first. So I can come into the schedule task scheduler library, be able to see which ones are already out here, and if it's not already there, I can create a basic task. So I would be able to come in and say, what do I want to run and when? I want to run the admin utility. I want to do it daily. I want it recurring every day, only I'd rather do it, say, at night. I want to start the program. I need to tell it which program to run. So it's the utility and not the setup that I want to run. It doesn't have any arguments. Lets me know. I can open the properties when I get done. Because in the properties, I want to go to my settings, and I want to say that if the task is already running, then don't start a new instance. But usually it'll just start up when you say get done and then shut itself down. And that way this will run every night, ready for me to go. so I don't have to think about getting it done. So as easy as that. And if I find that I don't need it anymore, or if I'm doing a couple of different ones, I can come in here and decide that I want to delete it. Not a problem with that at all. So easy enough for you to work with. And it will put the log file right in the MMSGE folder. And I can go in and look and see how it did each night. If I'm in Visual Foxborough, we talked about shrinking the database in SQL to free up the open space. Under Admin, you can pack your database. And what the pack does is it allows you to remove, it'll automatically get rid of, for the tables you specify, any deleted records. So before school starts, say the week or so before school starts, you might want to go in and pack all of your tables, so any deleted records are permanently deleted. Partway through this, say after 2 weeks into school when all your schedule changes are done, you might want to come in to the student grade records and student scheduling table and pack those tables which have your schedule changes. So if you deleted a course from the student, those are records that you might want to delete and pack. So it gives you that option that you can come in periodically. You also might want to periodically come in to the student attendance record, and get rid of the, maybe on a monthly basis. You might want to come through on the student attendance table. Daily attendance where the student was marked absent, nope, they're tardy, or it was wrong student, so those can rack up that wrong records. Because in Visual Foxborough, it only flags the record for deletion. It doesn't actually delete the records until you pack. So just as a different way to do that. If I was in here opening a new database, this is where I would set the location, the name of the database, and what database number. And it does tell you that it must be unique within your district. So not a problem there. In both instances, I'm going to reopen the database. You have an admin. There, on one of the reports is the database summary. What the database summary does is it will go through for every table and every school, especially if I say all schools in the district and list them individually. By table, by school year, it'll list how many records I have. In Visual Foxborough, how many are deleted and what is my total record count. So this lets me see which records I've already rolled to the new year, which ones I have not, or if I have a high percentage of deleted records compared to regular records, I might opt that now's the time to pack that table. So it gives me the option to be able to come in and see what's going on with it. And you can just print it and it'll build it up for you. So not a problem with that. It can show you how many records are out there for things like under admin. You have your edit logging. If the edit logging is turned on, it's currently off on this school, but it might be on for the one you're working with. And I can look at both of these and see what's going on. Now, if my database isn't already open when I pick some of the admin functions, it'll just tell me it's not and let me open it. And because in my SQL version I'm set to automatically open the database, I don't have to pick which one. But it's already on for the high school. I can turn it off. You can also, in admin, edit logging, is you can view your change history. What the change history is it's going to show you for each of the module or table for all of the users who have made changes to student records through either edits, operations, or deleted students. It will give you the ability to see what were the changes done. And I can pick a date range that I want. This lets me view that change history So if I go back, say, to the beginning of the month, I might want to see what sort of changes I put out there in biographic. And I can print, and it's going to show me, nothing for that table, who did the change and sometimes what was the change. You know, who and when did the change occur. So if it's in a biographic, it's going to say, oh, I changed middle initial to full middle name. I added a new student. There was a grade change done. It'll show me the old grade, the new grade, but it won't necessarily show me what course that was done for. It's just a sort of a quick, was there a change, because I'm showing old and new value. So I might want to output this, and I might want to output it to a PDF so I can search it later. And then under Admin, Edit Logging, I can come in and I can clear that log table, because that log table can get huge. You know, I've seen over a million records in it. And especially for records that for changes in prior school years, I might not care anymore who did the change. So if you periodically go in and clear that out, it's going to help the size of your database. And some people, it gets turned on, they forget it's on, and it just keeps accumulating records. This edit logging is different than the one in SQL, which has a transaction log, which does all of the changes, not just the ones to the student records. So I want to be able to come in and modify that. You also want to clear up periodically the view purge login log. What this is it's a log of every time somebody comes into the system, every time somebody logs in. The top 5 are the web portal, the bottom 3 are into generations. So it'll show me how many records, like I'm sitting right now here with a full year worth of records. So I might want to come in and say, oh, show me the records from last year and give me a print. And I can order it by the date versus the login type. I can pick any of these that I want. And it's currently descending by date, so it shows the 31st first, October, and then go back to August. So I can go ahead and print, and it will show me that information. When I log into the admin portal, it automatically shows this to me. So I get to see all of these logins and whether it failed or not. There is no IP address if I come into generations. There would be if I come in through the portal. So it lets me see how often I've come in or not. Now right now I did basically a 3-month time frame, and I had 17 pages of logs. And that's where I might want to come in here and purge it. So I can set a date range, pick which ones I want to purge, and then tell it to do so. During the school year, I might want to leave parent and student out there for the current quarter so the teacher can see how often the parents or students are logging into the portals. But I might not need to see how often the teachers are logging in, my generation staff. I might not need to see how often they're logging in. So it does give you that option to be able to see it. This is also available in the web portal if I need to do that. So either one, it lets me track it. We've talked a little bit of update database structure. What the update database structure does is it looks at the current version of the software, compares and looks at what field should be there, what table should be there, and it will make sure that you have the minimum length on your data fields and that it has all the fields that we're looking for. So whenever you get a new version of Generations, we'll always recommend that you update the database structure. When you are installing a new version of Generations or the web portal you would have to uninstall the old version first. Actually, you would back it up back up the database, you want to back up your iNet pub area, then you would uninstall the database, uninstall the software rather, get rid of the bin folder, and install the new version. You might find if you go into Add Remove Programs that you have 3 or 4 versions of generations out there, and we would recommend that you uninstall all the old versions. And the summertime is a great time to do that. If I look at my control panel and go into the Add Remove Programs, actually it's Programs and Features. When I look at and I'm sorting by my install date, so my generations is going to be up at the top. The version that I'm going to see for my MMS generations is the executable date, the setup file date, so I know which ones to uninstall. Because if it tries to uninstall and can't find the MSI file, then get a hold of us and we can get that file to you, because we have all of our versions going back forever. So it would be very easy for us to give that back to you and say that's where we're at. So if I look here, this 04.01.2003, 2013 rather, this is the date of the executable that I used when I installed it. And some schools might find that they have 2 versions, 3 versions, maybe 5 or 6 or 8 versions, and the system runs better if you get all the old versions out of there. So it just gives you the option. In Visual FoxPro, you might have an instance where you might need to do a file repair. And that happens when the record count in the header doesn't match the record count that's actually in the file. You know, there was a glitch in the system, you had to shut down or something happened. So system will usually prompt you when you need to run the file repair. So that's not a problem at all. Remember, as we're running any of these items, things like the edit logging or anything else, that you have the option that you can go in, you know, if I'm in school year maintenance and I've forgotten how to do something, remember that you can go to the question mark for help, and that will bring up how to do things. So it gives you that option saying, oh, I forgot what I was doing or where to go, and it knows where I am, and it's going to bring up help on that title. So there's my school year maintenance. Reminders for starting a new year, recommended tables. It'll give you information like this that you can go in and work with. So the help is here, and you can always right-click, go to print, that sort of thing. So it gives you the options to be able to go in and see what's going on. I can also come back up to the contents, look at my state modules, see what's here for those. You know, just come in and be able to work with anything that's out there. You also have under Help, About MMS, you have the facility to see what version you're currently running. For the visual, I haven't updated as recently. It'll show you the hours that we're here. We are in Eastern Time, the toll-free support number, the support email address, and our web page. So all of those are areas that you can access to get information on what you're doing. So it lets you come in and see consistencies. So all of those are ways to work with it. On the web portal, we can have on our website, there are live webinars. If you have a webinar subscription, then there is also the video library where we have recorded these. And you can go and watch them and pause them anytime you want. So it just gives you different ways to get help from here. I thank you for your time today, and we'll hopefully get you at another webinar. So thank you.